At the New Indian, we have with us Dr. Vikram Sampath, historian and author of 7 books. He earned acclaim with his 2 big volumes on Veer Savarkar, who is the ideologue of Indian nationalism and about whom we had several preconceived notions which Dr. Vikram Sampath has challenged beautifully. Well, welcome to Reason, the New Indians platform where we get to the reason behind the issues that concern you. Welcome, Vikram.
Thank you, Aarti. Always such a pleasure speaking to you.
I'm going to begin this conversation with your latest book, Brave Hearts of Bharat, Vignettes from Indian History. And let me make a confession that I wasn't able to finish the book. I did skim through the book, and I was pleasantly surprised that of the 15 brave hearts of Bharat, you have chosen the biggest warriors of Indian history about whom we did not read much in Indian history school books. You chose Lalitaditya of Kashmir. So that is so close to my heart, to my home. And my question to you is this: what took us so long to have Lalitaditya, Kashmir in the mainstream space of Indian history? Why did we never read about the 15 brave hearts of Bharat that you chose in this book, especially the, Lalitaditya of Kashmir, about whom very few people know?
That's true, Aarti, and that's so unfortunate. And I think, the book addresses these very, what I call loopholes or defects of Indian historiography. The extreme Delhi centricism of history as we see it. The history of India is not the history of Delhi. A student or even anyone growing up, learns by rote almost every small dynasty that ruled Delhi, the Lodhis, the Khiljis, the Tughlaqs, while these were barbaric marauders and invaders, barring a few architectural structures here and there. I don't know what their contribution to the civilization or to this country is, but still we have roads named after them. We commemorate them. Our students are made to know about them. And on the other hand, we have people featured in this book, including Lalitaditya, who in many ways, I think, laid the foundations of what Kashmir was to become. Literally a kind of an epicenter of knowledge for our civilization. When Adi Shankaracharya established the Sarvagnya Peeth in Kashmir, it was not without a reason. He had already established the 4 mutts in the 4 cardinal points of India. Kashmir was specifically the place for goddess Sharada that he dedicated, because it had developed into that seat of knowledge, philosophy, learning, and that was thanks to people like Lalitaditya, for whom the idea or conception of what building a great empire was not just expanding your political borders and boundaries or building these magnificent palaces and temples that he built, whether it was the Martan temple or the Parihas Keshav temple and all of those, and new cities that were established by him. But alongside, it was to make his empire a seat of learning. So wherever he went and invaded whomever, Yashovarman from Kannauj, from his court, he brings in some of the best of poets and scholars, Vakpati, Bhavabhuti, Atri Gupta, and others. And Atri Gupta was the grandfather of Abhinav Gupta, who started the whole Kashmir Shaivism school. And Kashmir then becomes a center not only for Shiva Sutras and Shaiva traditions, but also Tantric traditions. The Vijnan Bhairav Tantra gets written there. Jyotisha, Ayurveda, astronomy, all of these are nurtured in Kashmir thanks to the Karkota dynasty. How many students even know who the Karkotas are? You know the Khilji lineage, but the Karkotas, you would not even have heard that name. And Lalitaditya Mukta Pida doesn't ring a bell in any young person's mind. So I think this has been a subterfuge of the way historiography has been presented in India, that we lionize our invaders and the actual heroes, the actual heroines, the brave hearts, who actually contributed not only for the courageous resistance given to these invasions, but also built the civilization in a way. These people have not been given their due at all, and Lalitaditya is a prime example of that. And the subsuming of Kashmir and its Hindu past which I think is so important to know. When we talk of Kashmir today, it's only the contemporary history and the politics that surrounds it today and the demographics that are there now, which is what captures our attention. What about this Hindu past of Kashmir? That it had become this prime center of great learning and of valor too. I mean, Kalhana in his Rajatarangini, of course, paints a very exaggerated picture of the span of the empire under Lalitaditya, where he says he even went all the way down to Karnataka and Tamil Nadu and Lanka, and the Kashmir Empire almost was the whole of the subcontinent, which is a little bit of an exaggeration. But nonetheless, whatever, even if we discount that hyperbole, it was still politically too a very important part of our civilization. So I think it is by design that these stories have been kept away to suit contemporary politics, to suit contemporary needs.
Very important point. But I want to ask, having read a bit of almost every chapter in your book, what is your sense? Was there a center? Was there a heart of this Indian subcontinent? You're saying that history is not about Delhi, but whosoever sat in Delhi was also seen as the emperor of India. Do you think that there really was a center in India?
No, I don't think so. This is how the Persian chroniclers perhaps called it, and it's perhaps much later, the Mughal period, when Delhi became such an important part. What was the span and expanse of the Khiljis or the Tughlaqs of the Delhi Sultanate? Probably the Chola, the Rashtrakuta empire was, in terms of span, or Magad, the Mauryan Empire was, and the Guptas, they were probably much more vaster than the Delhi Sultanate. But I think with time and the Persian chroniclers who started making that as the epicenter, that is how subconsciously and post-independence, given the political importance of Delhi itself and the shifting of the capital itself in 1911 to Delhi.
But pre-independence also,
Yeah,
because the British...
the shifting of the capital to Delhi from Calcutta, Delhi started developing this importance. But otherwise, I don't. That is another issue that I speak about in the book. That what is regional and what is mainstream. When there is no center. So, do we say the Cholas are regional history? And what region? And so the Ahoms, who ruled for 600 years across a large part of Assam and what is northeast, other regions also of the place, they cannot be termed as a small regional force. Similarly, so many of the others, the Pallavas, the Chalukyas, who were such a mighty kingdom too, with multiple branches of the eastern, western Chalukyas, the Chalukyas in Gujarat. So this regional and central, I think that's a
it's post-colonial
construct, colonial and post-colonial construct, which we've been very subconsciously perpetuating with, again, today's politics and today's geography in mind, where Delhi is the epicenter of everything that happens in India, whether it's in media narratives, whether it's culture, whether it's everything else. So we extrapolate that even to our historical narratives, unfortunately.
But is there a common continuum or a common cultural or even religious thread to all these stories? 15 warriors. What was common among them?
Yeah, the common feature, because I don't make it a binary of religion in the book. People who have been featured in the book include people like Begum Hazrat Mahal. There's Chand Bibi in it. There's Banda Singh Bahadur, who established the first Sikh state almost 80 years before Maharaja Ranjit Singh did it. So I don't see it strictly as a Hindu-Muslim binary that usually such stories have a tendency to slip into. The common thread, I would say, is the story of courage, the story of valor, the story of also protecting one's honor, one's dignity, one's faith, and one's land. And among some of the stories, it's also protecting the civilizational glory of Bharat, the conception of.
So
Bharat.
let me interrupt you here. Yeah. What is Bharat? I mean, these 15 warriors of India, their empires, their kingdoms expanded beyond the boundaries of India, contemporary India. So what is Bharat? Explain it for our audience.
Yeah. I think what can be more evocative and more clear then what the Vishnu Puran quotes what is Bharat. So in that evocative verse, it says Uttaram yat samudrasya himadraschaiva dakshinam varshatat bharatam nama bharati yatra santati. This entire landmass south of the Himalayas and north of the oceans, that Varsha or the country is called Bharat, and its people are called its Santati or its children are called Bharatiya. The Rig Veda to the Devi Sukta in the Rig Veda, when all the rishis and the devas and all that see this Devi, the Adi Shakti, come and they ask her, "Who are you?" She very proudly proclaims, "Aham Rashtri." I am the queen of this Rashtra. So there was this idea. What does that Rashtra then mean? So politically, no country can be the same. I mean, 300 years ago, 400 years ago, the America was not what it is today. So political borders, boundaries keep changing. So post partition, we have different borders. Before that, as expansions and invasions and all these happen, political borders can change, but cultural and civilizational values, or how I think our ancestors imagined this subcontinent as a sacred geography and a sacred spot. And we see that all the time, Aarti. Just look at the way the pilgrim spots have been scattered across. The Shakti Pithas, 51 Shakti Pithas that are scattered across the country, the length and breadth. The establishment of the mutts, as I mentioned, of Adi Shankara, marking the cardinal points or the cultural borders of the subcontinent. The Jyotirlingas, the 12 Jyotirlingas, the Char Dhams, the seven, Puris, according to the Garud Puran, they're all scattered across the nation. And our ancestors undertook pilgrimages, which I think was a great way of fusing a sense of faith along with patriotism, environmental consciousness, all of that too, because everything was sacred. Rivers were sacred, mountains were sacred, forests were sacred. And it also helped to probably check any sense of parochialism. If I felt that my part of the country is very, very, sacred, there were 10 others which were as sacred as mine. So someone in Rameshwaram who would have thought my Jyotirling is the greatest. There was one more in Somnath. There was something in Kashi. So this expansion of the sacred geography, as even Diana Ek and Radha Kumar Mukherjee and several other historians have spoken about, that sacred geography and that cultural unification, a common sphere of cultural circulation, so to say, that went across the subcontinent, that has been a constant feature, irrespective of who came, who went, what were the political borders, which inevitably will change in the case of any country.
What I really found amazing in this book, Brave Hearts of Bharat, was that for the first time, a historian had taken the trouble to actually write about the women warriors of Bharat. This is something, again, very close to my heart. I feel very strongly about the contribution of women in history, but very little acknowledgement from our historians, whether it's in NCRT books or even otherwise in our public discourse. There's hardly any acknowledgement. In fact, I was again pleasantly surprised that you mentioned Rani Didda of Kashmir, and you have written about Ahilyabai Holkar, and there's so many other women. In fact, you also mentioned, you've written about Begum Hazrat Mahal of Awadh. You have written about Chand Bibi of Ahmednagar. You've written about Rani Naiki Devi of Gujarat. In fact, the Rani Kawav in Gujarat is an amazing monument.
Yeah. That was built
So,
actually by one of Ranis of the same dynasty,
yes.
Where usually it was kings who used to build structures. This lady who she built it in the memory of her husband,
Yes.
Rani Udaymati of the Chalukya dynasty of Gujarat. There too, but Aarti, I think.
So my question to you, Vikram, is that generally we say that Indian society has a problem of patriarchy. Is patriarchy also a problem in history writing? Have our historians done justice to our women warriors, women rulers? because I remember reading Kalhana, and he not accusing, in fact, he claims that Rani Didda, for example, used to practice witchcraft and black magic. So I could see that there's a patriarchal lens that the historian Kalhana is using while dismissing everything that Rani Didda had done. Do you see, when we talk about Ahilyabai Holkar, when we talk about Devi, when we talk about Chand Bibi of Ahmednagar, or Rani Abaka Chauta of Ullal, and Begum Hazrat Mahal of Awadh, do you think that historians have been wearing patriarchal lens while describing their role?
Very, very true. Not only contemporary historians of our time, but also the chroniclers of their times, which is the saddest part. A few instances. Rani Naiki Devi, you mentioned, of Gujarat. Here was a lady who was the widow of the Chalukyan king who was murdered in Gujarat, and she had a little boy whose regent she was. And at that very time, taking advantage of the situation in Gujarat, Muhammad Ghori decides to attack the place, and he thinks it's going to fall an easy prey after all she's a woman, and so it's easy to annex the place. But she puts up such a strong defense. She has this strategy to also send out messages to several other kings, including her contemporaries, which included Prithviraj Chauhan. But he scoffs at it, and he, doesn't ally with her. Much to his own peril, he was to realize a couple of maybe 10, 15 years later that he would be defeated at the Battle of Tarain. This is 1178 that we're talking of. And then she decides to take him on single handedly, and then pulls him down to her strategy of having a battle at the plains. She has the upper hand, and the Gujarat army has an upper hand. And in the Battle of Kasarhada that happens there, the Ghori is beaten black and blue, and he's so humiliated that a woman has defeated him that he never turns back to Gujarat again. This was such an iconic moment in the history of India, because had Ghori occupied Gujarat, then that whole region, Rajputana, everything would have fallen to him like a pack of cards. But she had halted that entire march. But even contemporary chroniclers of Chalukyan history of her times, Meru Tunga and others, the Jain scholars who've written Prabandha Chintamani and several other books, there's hardly any mention or reference to Naiki Devi. They attribute the victory to that child who probably was just tied to her waist, and he did nothing, strategizing or the military conquest. More condescendingly, what's written is the opponent was so weak that even a woman could defeat him. Even a woman could.
So that's the issue with all the history written about women warriors.
And same with Rani Abbaka, like what you spoke about Kalhana. Similarly, Abbaka Chautha, it's a small principality in Karnataka, Mangalore coastal region, and some of her children had died. And
same story.
The Italian traveler who comes, Pietro della Vel, and he meets her. He also has a conversation with the locals and the people there, and he documents that, which I chronicle here, that most people are saying that this queen is a little, capricious, and she has poisoned her own children so that she can rule. So I think that sort of a narrative continued through the way people saw, especially women in power, and how they could not digest the fact. I talk about Rudrama Devi of Warangal. Her father, Ganpati Deva of the Kakatiya dynasty, he didn't have sons. So he actually trains one of his daughters. The gender of the girl is hidden from the family and from the general population, and she's taken away in seclusion somewhere, kept in safekeeping, and taught military warfare. And it's only when she comes of age that people get to know that this is a girl. And then the two of them rule Warangal jointly, and after the father dies, she takes over as his successor. But from that day onwards, conspiracies, subterfuge, all the time to keep her out, throw her away, both within the Kakatiya dynasty and also all the neighboring kingdoms, the Yadavas and others who were there around, constant attacks. And this lady was fighting battles against these conspiracies till the time she was 80. And she died in battle fighting one such usurper when she was all of 80, leading a battle,
Yes.
dressed in male attire and armor, which is how she's depicted. So I think the times that they were in was very difficult. There are also these positive stories, Aarti, like Ganpati Deva, who I mentioned. He ensured that his daughter was given that kind of a training in
And status.
Similarly, several centuries later, the two people I again chronicle, Ahilyabai Holkar, her father-in-law, Malhar Rao
Yes.
Holkar, he gives his daughter-in-law education. He's not very happy with his own son, Khande Rao, who's given to all kinds of pleasures and so on. He starts trusting the daughter-in-law so much. And when he's on his all India conquest with the Peshwa, the Panipat War, all of that is happening at that time. There are regular correspondences between him and his daughter-in-law, whom he shares all these details with, gives her training in administration and governance. And when the son dies and all the other wives of his commit sati, Malhar Rao specifically tells Ahilyabai not to commit it because she's literally his backbone. And then when Malhar Rao dies, she takes over as the ruler of Indore, and that becomes a golden period in the governance and administration of Indore itself. Likewise, Velu Nachiyar in Tamil
Yes.
Nadu of the Shivaganga family, her father too ensured that this little girl was trained in all kinds of Tamil, fencing and different kinds of warfare that were there of the time. So much so that she then put on a resistance, the first woman to put on a spirited resistance against the English East India Company in
Yes.
the late 18th century. And stories like this. And in Velu Nachiyar's army, there was a Dalit girl called Kuili who becomes probably India's first female suicide bomber. She douses herself in oil and goes and ignites herself and goes into the main ammunition store of the British so that the whole fort is blown off. And Kuili is immortalized that way. And 50 years later, in Lucknow, under Begum Hazrat Mahal, you had this person called Uda Devi Pasi of the Pasi community, a Dalit girl again, who single-handedly shot down something like 35 to 36 sepoys sitting atop a peepal tree. And when Colin Campbell comes to reoccupy Lucknow, and then he finally shoots her down and her corpse, he doesn't even realize that it's a woman because so heroically someone seemed to be shooting at all the British soldiers. It said that he comes and actually salutes her corpse when he finds that it's a woman. So I think these are such fascinating stories.
Can we safely also say that caste, the way we understand it now, was not understood or was not practiced the way it's being practiced, say, post British colonial period in India? In medieval India, we did not have, or in all these kingdoms and these emperors and the warriors, there was no caste consideration. Everybody was seen with an egalitarian lens.
Not entirely true, because that's a huge
but at least
itself,
in the 15 warriors that you've studied, what was their outlook about caste?
About not only caste, even class, the upward mobility, right? I mean, many of them do not belong to privileged backgrounds. They come from, even Malhar Rao Holkar, he was actually belonged to the Dhangar or the shepherd caste, which was quite low in the hierarchy. But he could manage to have that mobility, upward mobility, to become one of the main saranjams of the Peshwa, empire, and get a prized location of Indore as his principality. Similarly, some of the other people I've chronicled, like Lachit Borphokon in Assam, his father was a gardener whom the Ahom Maharaja looks at, looks at him favorably, and given the way he was nicely planting all the saplings in an order, he says, this man is very, very structured and I think I should take him into my service. And that's how he rises up the ranks. And his son then becomes the Barphukan, or the military commander of the Ahom army, leading a resounding victory for them in the Battle of Saraighat in 1671. Similarly, this Kanhoji Angre, who was the Sarkhel or the naval commander of the Maratha Navy after Shivaji Maharaj's passing away, who again came from very humble backgrounds in terms of caste also as well as class too. But then they could rise to that level where upward mobility seemed to be a possibility. But that doesn't really take away the fact that the discriminatory practices of
They were going on simultaneously
simultaneously, but
in
it was possible for some people by sheer dint of their merit and their valor or whatever to rise up the ranks.
the brave hearts of Bharat. You, even though you said that, a lot of history which has been denied to us was because of subterfuge, or because historians looked at Indian history from Delhi centric point of view. But you also included Begum Hazrat Mahal of Awadh, and you have also written about Chand Bibi of Ahmednagar. So, two Muslim rulers. How do they fit in this whole story? On one hand, you're saying that there's been denial of Hindu history at one level, but you also including Muslims in this Hindu history.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because Begum Hazrat Mahal, for instance, if you look at here was a fascinating story again. She's born of very very humble origins. She's the daughter of an African slave. A lot of African slaves who were coming from East Africa, and the Nawabs of Awadh had started an entire Paltan of the blacks, who the British called as Amazons. She was born there. Then she goes into the Parikhana of Wajid Ali Shah, becomes his concubine. She bears him a son, and so then she's elevated to the status of a Begum Hazrat Mahal. And she brings out, and then she becomes somehow Destiny's chosen child. I won't reveal the details of her story, but she becomes Destiny's chosen child to lead the entire revolt of 1857 when it breaks out in Lucknow. And Wajid Ali by then has been deposed away to Calcutta. But she started giving out these proclamations in a very queenly manner, which are called the Begum's proclamations. And even when Queen Victoria brings out her 1858 proclamation to end the rule of the East India Company and establish British Raj here, she brings out a Begum's proclamation rebutting every point of Queen Victoria. And the point of her proclamations was a syncretic struggle of both Hindus and Muslims. And she made a call. Her army general was a Hindu. And she also, in her proclamation, she said Hindus and Muslims should together fight our common enemy who's attacking both our deen and dharam. Whereas at the same time in Lucknow, there was another branch of this man called Maulvi Ahmadullah Shah, who was calling for an Islamic jihad against the Kafirs. And the two of them always were at loggerheads. And that disunity was also the cause for why Lucknow could, though it held on for the longest period of time, it could not eventually, break the back of the British. And the British had the better because there was inter rivalry. So on the one hand, there was this Kattarwad, the extremist faction also of the Muslim group, which was in Lucknow at that time. But you also had Begum and her son Birjis Qadar, who were making these calls for inclusive struggle. So I think those stories, instead of just making it as a Hindu revivalism or a supremacist view, I think these stories also need to be told of how they were exceptions, even in this group where there were people who were looking for an inclusion. Likewise, Chand Bibi, I mean, she probably was one of the greatest bastions of resistance against someone none less than Emperor Akbar. Two times he sends his armies down south. He wants to conquer the Deccan. He sends his son to manage the campaign. Badly beaten back and sent away. And she was managing two kingdoms of the Adil Shahi, Sultanate of the Deccan. Her own, maternal house of Ahmednagar and her sasural of Bijapur. She was handling both of them, defending it against Akbar. And finally, Akbar had to come himself all the way down and through a lot of cunning means get her eliminated. So I think, instead of looking at history and our warriors and their tales of courage only through a religious lens, would do a lot of disservice to many of these people. They should not be denied their due only because of the faith or the community that they belong to. And it's an inclusive history of Bharat. So everyone has a place and a role in that.
Absolutely, I agree with you. Now, tell me, did the chroniclers of Chand Bibi or Begum Hazrat also see them from a very patriarchal framework?
There's so little written about them. Again, as I said, Begum Hazrat Mahal is a forgotten episode. I mean, when we talk of 1857, the biggest icon that comes is Rani Lakshmi Bai and Khoob Ladi Mardani,
Yes.
Jhansi Wali Rani thi. No doubt, but contemporary of hers was also there, who probably, as I said, held on to Lucknow. The siege of the residency in Lucknow took a much longer time for the British to actually get rid of, and even later on, she escapes to Nepal, and the king of Nepal, Jang Bahadur, is not willing to give her shelter because he's an ally of the British, and she says, "I don't need your khairat. I will buy my dignity." And whatever jewels and wealth she had, she gave it to him, and she said, "I'll purchase my independence here." She lived there. She died there in an unmarked grave near what is today the Jama Masjid in Kathmandu. But she had ironically got that constructed. And look at the name she gave it. She called it Hindustani Masjid. Though she went away there, she built a masjid there which she called Hindustani Masjid. So the affinity for that place was so much, and that's why even someone none less than even Veer Savarkar in his book on 1857 extols the virtues and the bravery of Begum Hazrat Mahal. But sadly, she's not spoken about as much because she didn't burst into the battlefield herself. She was strategizing, playing this game of chess from behind the scenes. Maybe that's one reason she did not get as much as, say, Lakshmi Bai, who actually burst into the field, was martyred in the battlefield. And obviously, that gets a lot more precedence than someone who then escaped away to Nepal and so on.
Also noticed a chapter on Banda Singh Bahadur. And I want to ask about this because often I read or I hear people talking about the Maratha Empire. Everybody knows Shivaji. Everybody talks about how Marathas fought the British. But very little has been said or talked about what the Sikh Empire did or what Banda Singh Bahadur did. Why is it that Sikhs have also been denied their contribution?
Extremely sad. And Banda Singh was one such person. Again, a very, very fascinating background. He was a Hindu before. He was himself a mystic, kind of a, he had illusions of grandeur, of being some kind of a magician and all of that. He'd learned some magic tricks. And it is his interview with Guru Gobind Singh, which completely changes his life. He becomes his Banda or his slave. So it's he then gets a crash course in Sikh history, which jolts him from the core. The kind of sufferings that the Sikh community and particularly all its gurus faced, whether it was Tegh Bahadur or Arjun Singh or Guru Gobind Singh himself and his children, who were put into the wall alive and so on. And hears all these things. He's driven by this whole sense of revenge to clear all these atrocities of the past, and that becomes an entire campaign which leads to the formation of the Sikh state. But later on, he's caught, and in the streets of Delhi, the manner in which brutally he is killed, his child is killed in front of him, and the quivering liver of the child is pulled out, and he's made to eat it. All kinds of tortures, which would literally, the kind of sacrifice that the Sikh community has endured and faced for keeping their faith, keeping their honor alive. It's so seldom spoken about.
And they were, to begin with, raised an army to protect Hindus.
Yes. And so even with the entire that chapter, I would urge people to read that because it's heart wrenching.
Yes.
The Mughal army kept giving them all the option that if you convert to Islam, we will save your life. But not one of the Sikhs, sacrificed their faith. Many of them voluntarily they wanted to get killed. Yes. Cart loads of decapitated heads of Sikhs were brought to Delhi and hung from trees in the city. So it's a very, very heart wrenching story, and I hope some of the Sikh community themselves have forgotten these stories today, and they ally with the same forces and talk of secessionist movements and so on, which is an irony
Yes.
today, that it's a complete amnesia of their history, the sacrifices of their revered gurus, and what all they have faced to ensure that their faith and their lands are protected. So today it's an irony, and that's why I think history should be an eye opener. And I would see Banda Singh Bahadur's story in that light, and that's why I thought his inclusion was very important.
Well, thank you so much for this fascinating conversation. Looking forward to reading next volume of another Brave Hearts of Bharat.
Thank you, Aarti. Always such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.